Hello, this is Ralph K. Genorio with the Lecture for European History for the Virtual Learning Day on Friday, the 6th of October, 2022. We have been talking about John Calvin and Calvinism and its importance to the history of the United States. I'll remind you, Calvin's a Frenchman. He's given an opportunity to practice his religious ideas, which are the basis of Reformed Christianity, the Reformed Church, which includes the Dutch Reformed Church, the Scottish Presbyterian Church, the Presbyterian churches here in the United States, the Congregational Church in New England, the Wesleyans, the Methodists, the Puritans, who left England to Holland and to arrive in Plymouth, who became known as the Pilgrims, were Calvinists. The Puritans who settled Massachusetts colony and Rhode Island and Connecticut are Puritans. Many of the founding fathers were Puritans, inspired by Calvinist ideas. And the basic constitutional structure of our federal government is closely based on the polity, the organizational structure of the Presbyterian Church. So Calvinism is something that most Americans are affected by, even if they don't understand it. And it's something which you should understand a bit. Calvin described his ideas in the Institutes of the Christian Religion, his great book. And while he tried and failed to practice them and to create a Christian utopia in Geneva, Switzerland, the people rose up because it ended up being a meddlesome theocracy where nobody had any privacy and where the government would put you in the stocks or in shackles or in chains for working on the Sabbath. Calvin's ideas in terms of voluntary church are very powerful and very popular. Now, one of his ideas, as we talked about yesterday, is the notion of predestination, that God, for reasons that make sense to him, understand that a vast number of people, perhaps a majority, perhaps a supermajority, who knows, will choose not to associate themselves with him, will choose not to be saved, will choose out of anger or resentment or different priorities or whatever, lack of faith, to not become one of God's people. And that refusal, according to Calvin, is what damns you. It's what separates you from God. It's a persistent refusal on the human's part to say yes to God and what he offers. Now, from our point of view, all monotheism, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, is rooted in a concept of free will, where we have not been created as mind-numbed robots, but rather in order to make the choices as to whether or not to orient our lives towards a concept of God and love and faithfulness, or to not do so. And that free will saves or damns us. But from God's point of view, Calvin points out, which is the true point of view, because God, man, of the two, God is going to have the more valid point of view, being God. He knows before you're born whether you're saved or not. He knows because to him, time is not linear. Whereas for us, we in the weave of time perceive future, past, present, past. It's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to... It happens, it happened, we remember it. God looks upon time like we look upon this board at once. From a divine point of view, he knows the outcome. Creation is one moment, not a progression of things. So while from our point of view we have the free will to choose our fate, he knows what we'll end up choosing before we choose it. This brings up the concept of the elect, which we also talked about, which is the belief that certain people are going to be saved and others are not. And those who are going to be saved are called the elect. Well, that's all fine and good until human beings begin to explore the question of precisely what do you need to do to be part of the elect. In the end, you're not in control. You either are or you're not. And who is the elect and who is not? And how do we know? Whenever human beings, in whatever way, try to explore the details of who is saved and who is not, usually you end up in some form of apostasy or heresy or very strange teachings. And there have been a bunch that have been rooted in the concept of predestination, not being properly understood. In any event, that is part of Calvinism. And Calvin's Reformed Christianity is one of those things that is a powerful force in the Protestant Reformation, to the point where there are basically four categories of Christians that come out of Luther's split with the church. There are Protestants, which are properly Lutherans and Anglicans, members of Luther's church, members of the Church of England. And then there are Catholics, of course, that remain loyal to the church. And there are Reformed Christians, which follow the ideas of Calvin. And these include the French Huguenots. They include the Scottish Presbyterians, they include the English Puritans, and they include, coming from the English Puritans, American Presbyterians, Congregationalists, Wesleyans, Methodists, and of course the Dutch Reformed Church. And then there are the unstructured Christians, the Baptists, Anabaptists, Quakers, Shakers, who go their own way and who really don't fall into any of the other categories. And one of the reasons why the Peace of Augsburg doesn't work is because the solution in the Peace of Augsburg in the middle 1500s, in the middle 16th century, is the religion of the king is the religion of the people, Catholic, Protestant. Catholic or Protestant. Well, since the Reformed Christians and the unstructured Christians are not a part of this deal, there's not going to be an ongoing peace, because Reformed Christianity is a very powerful force at this time. So let's look a bit at one of the things that makes Calvinism in specific and Protestantism in general more different from what has come before. First of all, there is the concept of the priesthood of all believers. And the priesthood of all believers is the notion that there is no separate priestly class in Reformed Christianity and in unstructured Christianity. Instead, you have ministers of the word who are theological experts, and you have elders who basically are caretakers and administrators for the church. But everyone who is a professed Christian is expected to carry the burden of Christianity, to live a life that is an example of Christian faith, to take a leading role when and how they can in supporting the faith and making it happen, to make it their personal business that the Christian faith is understood and that it is going to be not only maintained but spread. That's the job not just of a bunch of priests or clerics or nuns, but every professed Christian. And also this means that every professed Christian needs to read the Bible. This is something different that the Protestants and Reformed and unstructured Christians add. The notion that everyday people should wrestle with and study the Bible, hopefully with the help of somebody who knows what they're doing, a minister or Bible scholar, something like that. Then there is the idea that everyone is a saint. These groups call themselves the saints. And they're not trying to be arrogant with this. What they're saying is, and I made reference to this yesterday, given that the only God, the Lord of the universe, took his only begotten Son and put him through an ordeal that ended in his premature death, so that we might be saved, so that our original sin might be cleansed, so that we might be forgiven and therefore open to salvation. Given that amazing sacrifice made by the Son of God, maybe as a person you should feel a great sense of gratitude and a great sense of wonder and of duty, so that you live a life that is exemplary in its rootedness in Christian love. The concept that every professed Christian believer is a saint. It's a very different idea than what had come before, where saints were seen, and still are seen by many denominations, as specially godly people, unusually holy people, like Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who I've told you about. But the idea that every professed Christian is a saint, is called to be a saint, what that does is it ratchets up the tension and increases the challenge of being a Christian. The priesthood of all believers, we're all saints. And that what that brings us to is a change in what is called vocation. Vocation, V-O-C-A-T-I-O-N. Victor, Oscar, Charlie, Alpha, Tango, India, Oscar, November. Vocation. Vocation in the medieval Christian and Roman Catholic sense is a calling to serve God in a particular way. So a priest is fulfilling a vocation. They are saying yes to a special call to become a Roman Catholic priest, or a nun, or a monk. The vocation is to be called out of the world to become a man or woman of Christ, and then go back into the world as a representative of the faith. So the term vocation is a highly specialized thing. Now, coming from this tradition, I'll tell you, I may be crazy, but I have the sense that what I'm doing right now, teaching history, is my vocation. Rightly or wrongly, I have this belief that what I'm doing is a good use of my talents, and is me saying, yes, God, I will use my talents to try to do something useful, which is to pass intact the culture of Western civilization onto the next generation. Rightly or wrongly, I have this notion. And again, it's not arrogant. I'm not saying I'm the bestest teacher ever. I'm saying that when I teach, I'm not doing it strictly for the paycheck, although that helps. I'm doing it because I think it is my way of saying yes to God. Now, that is a somewhat Protestant idea, because what we end up with the shift from a unitary Catholic society to a society with multi-denominations is what becomes known as the Protestant work ethic. The Protestant work ethic. And what the Protestant work ethic is, it can be summarized in the Shaker statement, hands to work, hearts to God. Whatever you do, whether you're a shoemaker, a carpenter, a street sweeper, a custodian, a teacher, a doctor, a lawyer, an architect, a pilot, a stewardess, I could go on. Whatever you do it not to be admired by other people. Do it not just for the money. Do it as a service to God. Do it as a holy thing, as something separate from the rub and tussle of normal life. Make of your work a sacrifice and an offering worthy of a faithful person saying, here, God, this is me giving you a life, part of my life anyway, to serve you. The Protestant work ethic takes the concept of vocation and removes it from just a clerical calling, and instead makes it about whatever you do. Do it righteously. Do it with dedication. Do it to the best of your ability, as if you were doing this work not for belly interests, but as an act of faithful service to God. The role of education becomes more important as a result of Protestantism because Protestants are called to read the Bible. Okay, now we're going to shift ahead to item K, Kilo, the Catholic Reformation or the Counter-Reformation. The Roman Catholic Church is caught flat-footed by Luther. It is not able to control the message and prevent a peasant uprising with Luther, as it was able to do with Wycliffe, as it tried to do but failed to do with Jan Hus in Bohemia and Moravia. In the case of Luther, the printing press spreads his ideas so far and wide, and then spreads the ideas of Ulrich Zwingli and John Calvin and Menno Simons and others. So, what is the church going to do? Because what it had been doing resulted in the Humpty Dumptifying of the Roman Catholic Church. It's split into increasingly small, narrow denominations. Well, maybe what we should do is look hard at ourselves and reform ourselves. So the Council of Trent is, which is in the early to mid-1500s, roughly around the time of the Peace of Augsburg, is the Roman Catholic Church's attempt to reform and cleanse itself of a lot of the excesses that Luther started to complain about. It's not a complete capitulation by any stretch to Luther's ideas of theology or anything like that, but it is an attempt of loyal Catholics to look at the circumstances and say, no, pluralism in the sense of a Catholic priest having multiple parishes to take care of simultaneously, or absenteeism, those are no. The veneration of relics should not be monetized, and the sale of indulgences should be curtailed, and the whole concept of indulgences should be theologically re-examined. But that's not enough. There's a fire in the minds of believing Calvinists and Lutherans and Anabaptists and others. And that fire is like the early Christians, not because the society happens to be Christian, but because we are convinced Christian believers, we are stepping out of the world and taking great risks to lead a Christian life. That's what we're going to do. We are not trying to lead a normal life. We are trying to lead a life devoted to God. And remember, they're not trying to just exist among the many denominations. They all still think at this time that it's going to be possible to reunify Christianity. So in the end, they're not expecting to live and let live. In the end, the Peace of Augsburg concept is not what they're hoping for. What they're hoping for is to either reunify the Roman Catholic Church or to reform the Roman Catholic Church along Lutheran lines or along Calvinist lines. Their goals are still universal. So they are on fire. And Roman Catholics need to meet this. And one of the ways they do this is by focusing on their strengths. One of the strengths of Roman Catholicism is mysticism. Protestantism and Reformed Christianity are products of the printing press, are products of the book. They are fairly intellectual, logical things. Luther's theology, Calvin's theology, the application of reason. But reason ain't enough. When you're dealing with grief, when you're dealing with love, when you're dealing with betrayal, when you're dealing with the big things in life, intuition, feelings, emotions, passions, these are what matter. And the Roman Catholic Church has a deep set of traditions involving mysticism, involving worshiping God in an intuitive fashion. So the veneration of saintly lives, like Saint Teresa of Avila, who is a saint whose life inspires. You can look it up and see. Or the veneration of other lives, the choice to leave the world and join a religious order. Protestantism does not give you that. In Protestantism, you've got the Protestant work ethic. But in Roman Catholicism, you can still leave the world and join a monastery. You can join a religious order. You can become a Franciscan friar and serve the poor with your own hands. You can become a Dominican and study theology. And there's going to be a group of new orders. There are going to be the Theatines, the Oratory of the Divine Word, but particularly a Basque soldier named Inigo is going to change the Catholic world. Inigo is a hidalgo. He's a soldier. He's a warrior. And he takes part in a number of battles as a young man, purely as a soldier, purely as a fighter, and he's almost killed. Inigo is from the Basque country, whose capital is the city of Pamplona, where they have the running of the running of the bulls. He's a Basque, which is where the corrida, the Spanish bullfight, comes from. The Basque were and are known to be intense, passionate, a bit eccentric people. And Inigo is no exception to this. When he is almost killed, Inigo, like St. Paul, has a series of visions at the edge of death as he's experiencing fever dreams. And he comes out of this long ordeal of recovery a different man, a changed man, a man who is clear about the battles that he must now face. And those battles are not going to be wearing armor and using a sword and using a gun on the battlefield. Probably, anyway. But the battles are going to be no less intense, no less violent, and no less dangerous. Because Inigo has a sense of how to save Holy Mother Church, of how to save the Roman Catholic faith. What Inigo, who is now Ignatius of Loyola after his experience, just as Saul of Tarsus becomes St. Paul and Abram becomes Abraham, Inigo is known to history by the Latinized name. Inigo is the Basque name. The Latinized name, St. Ignatius of Loyola. He's not a saint yet. And what he comes up with is known as the spiritual exercises. The spiritual exercises are a series of visualizations that a believing Roman Catholic Christian can use in order to focus on what God wants from them. They are using meditation and visualization and focused prayer to try to explore how God has already worked in each of our individual lives, to see the hand of God at work shaping us and making us ready for a task, a vocation, if and only if we say yes. It's designed, the spiritual exercises, and I went through a variant of them led by a Jesuit priest, by one of the followers of Ignatius of Loyola back in the 1990s when I was a practicing Catholic still. And what it's designed to do is to awaken in the individual who goes through the exercises a sense that God has already been at work, deeply at work in your life, and is offering you opportunities to serve him with distinction, to offer a genuinely fervent service. And what the spiritual exercises often do is they ignite in a person what's called a fervor, or an intense passion, a desire to take one's life and serve God by serving the church. One of the great prayers of Ignatius of Loyola is on my wall, and it's a prayer describing one man's concept of generosity, but this man believes it was inspired by God. Dear Lord, help me to serve you as you truly deserve, to give and not count the cost, to fight and not heed my wounds, to toil and not ask for shelter, to labor and ask for no reward save that of knowing that I do your will. Now that is a prayer. God, make me useful to you. Take what you've given me. I'm giving it back to you. If you love someone, set them free. If they come back, it's real. Give me the opportunity to try to serve you with the degree of generosity and dedication with which you have already intervened in my life. The spiritual exercises and Inigo's vision, Ignatius of Loyola's vision, are incredibly powerful. And what Ignatius says he wants from his new Society of Jesus, which is an order different from the Franciscans, different from the Dominicans, different from the other medieval orders. This is a modern order. They don't have fancy special clothes. The Society of Jesus, also known as the Jesuits, what they want to do is get the most highly educated, highly cultured, aristocratic, dedicated people they can. They are interested in spreading the faith, using the political and social systems by converting not the people, but the leadership. And so Jesuits have to be remarkable men in that they have to find a way to appeal to remarkable men who run countries, who run businesses, who run cities, who lead families, who are themselves accomplished, self-made people. So what Ignatius the kind of person Ignatius tries to recruit is what he calls a thoughtful man of action. A thoughtful man of action is somebody who really thinks about the world, really cares about doing good in the world, but isn't going to sit on a rock somewhere meditating and isn't going to sit inside the walls of a monastery. A thoughtful man of action is going to go out into the world and is going to do right and serve good and be of use in the struggle, in this world, in this life, between good and evil, between right and wrong. This is a war. As much as Luther saw our human life as a battleground between the Lord and the devil. Not that the devil has any chance in the long run, but our human life, at our scale of being, we struggle with temptation, and we are oppressed by darkness and evil, and there's all this stuff. And to be a good person involves being willing to risk your life, your fortune, your sacred honor for the sake of God. That takes a special kind of dedication, a special kind of vocation, a special kind of calling. What Ignatius wants is thoughtful men of action, men who can contemplate at one moment and then take action in the struggle on the battlefield of life with courage and with skill and with knowledge. But there's something more. When the Pope, Paul III, grants the charter, yes, it's a charter, of the Society of Jesus, Ignatius includes in it the 3 Benedictine monastic vows and a 4th vow that's going to make the Jesuits particularly effective All members of the Society of Jesus who join, they're not forced to, they join willingly, vow the vows of poverty. I will not accumulate wealth. I will not see myself as a tool of my family and its politics. I am not interested in accumulating stuff. That is not my purpose, nor is my purpose physical security. A vow of chastity. My goal is not to have children, not to find the love of a woman, not to have a family of my own, not to be a part, again, of my family's politics. And obedience to superiors. I am a soldier in the battle between right and wrong, between good and evil, between Christ and Antichrist. And I'm part of an organization, the Roman Catholic Church, the Society of Jesus, and I will follow the orders of those appointed above me. Just like a private soldier in the United States Army will follow the orders of corporals, of sergeants, of lieutenants, captains, majors, lieutenant colonels, colonels, and generals. When you are a soldier, you don't own your life anymore. You've given your life to service, and Jesuits see themselves literally as soldiers. They were founded by a soldier, a hidalgo, a warrior. But the fourth vow is what makes the Jesuits unique, because nobody else takes this vow. The fourth vow is a vow of personal obedience to the Pope. Why? Because the Pope is the general of our human army under God in this war. We are not simply speaking symbolically for the sake of being literate. No, this is real. This is literal war. And not only will I follow my chain of command, but there are times when the Pope is blindsided by opposition from within the church, when the Pope is obstructed by the bureaucracy of the church, when there's pushback against the Pope by members of the Christian faith, which make it difficult for the Pope to effectively be the general of the forces of good. So, by making that personal vow of loyalty to the Pope, a Jesuit, a member of the Society of Jesus, is placing themselves at the personal command of the general in charge. Whatever else is happening, the popes, this is what Ignatius intends, are to have at their disposal, without any interfering bureaucracy, the most highly educated, highly dedicated, highly skilled, aristocratic leadership type missionaries and soldiers of Christ in the world. And the kind of obedience that Ignatius of Loyola is asking for, he calls it corpse-like obedience. If the Pope orders you to jump, you're in the air. Your body is following the directions of the Pope's words like it was your central nervous system, like it was your mind. A Jesuit, a member of the Society of Jesus, in Ignatius's vision, is so thoroughly dedicated to Christ and to the war to save Christians and to spread Roman Catholic Christianity, that if the Pope gives them an order, they are fulfilling it. They are saying yes to it. They have vowed to obey him as a soldier on the battlefield has to obey his officers if you want to win the battle. The Jesuits are the most feared shock troops of the Roman Catholic faith in the Counter-Reformation. It is very arguable that the Society of Jesus alone stops the advance of Calvinism, of Lutheranism, of the unstructured Christianity as something that could take over other parts of Europe, and limits those to the regions they've already taken. In fact, there are some areas in the center of Germany that had gone over to Lutheranism that are reclaimed for the Roman Catholic Church because of the efforts of the Society of Jesus. But it is not only within Europe that the Society of Jesus functions. Some of the most remarkable missionaries in human history are Jesuits. Father Joliet and Father Marquette go into the Canadian wilderness to missionize to the Indians. And along the area that becomes the American-Canadian border, they help convert a number of native tribes to Roman Catholic Christianity. It's going to have political consequences in terms of the French and Indian Wars. The French are going to have a bunch of allies among the Indians because those Jesuit priests went deep into the wilderness and succeeded at converting a number of heretofore pagan hunter-gatherer peoples. St. Francis Xavier works with lepers in Africa and then becomes the chief missionary in Japan, establishing a Christian community around Nagasaki on the southern island of Kyushu. We are going to explore some of what happens in Japan when I next see you in person. I'll be showing you excerpts from a movie called Silence, which is about what happens to the Christianizing mission within Japan after a period of civil war. In particular, though, I will focus on Matteo Ricci. Matteo Ricci is born in Italy around the time of the Battle of Lepanto in the 1571, which is a major sea battle between the Catholic League and the Ottoman Turks, which the Turks lose, giving the Christians more secure control over the Mediterranean Sea. Ricci grows up, has a fervor, becomes a Jesuit. Ricci has a brilliant mind for languages and for memory. Ricci is taught the mnemonic technique of the memory palace. Now, I've told you about this already, but I will remind you of it. A memory palace is a way of purposefully storing information. So, okay, I'm going to be telling you about Matteo Ricci. I'm going to imagine Matteo Ricci as a portrait bust of a sort of Italian-looking Jesuit priest. And he's going to be in Chinese clothing. I'll tell about why later. This is my memory of Ricci. I'm visualizing it as an object. I'm then going to take that object up the stairs of the American Museum of Natural History, which is my own personal memory palace. If I used one, I really don't. I'm a creature of the book and of the screen, and so I never really fully learned to use this mnemonic technique, but I understand its principles, and that's what I'm trying to teach you. So I've got my portrait butt of Matteo Ricci, and I go up the stairs of the main entrance, and I go past a dugout canoe, life-size canoe from the Polynesian Pacific, because that's what used to be in the main entrance when I was a kid. I don't know what's there now. And Matteo Ricci is not fiction. He's nonfiction. So I go up to the second floor. Behind the dugout canoe, there's this beautiful marble stairway. I go up to the second floor, and I'm in a gallery looking over a number of things. And I'm going to go into the history wing, not the literature, or not the science wing or the math wing, the history wing. And I go past the rooms for ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia and Persia and Greece and Rome and the Middle Ages, and I pass the Renaissance. I'm not going to go to the French Revolution. That's too far. I'm not going to go to the English Civil War. That's too far. I'm not even going to go to the 30 Years' War. That's too far. So I've got Matteo Ricci. I go into the room that deals with early exploration and contact between Europeans and non-Europeans, which we'll talk about fairly soon. And I'm going into the room of the Protestant Reformation, which is next to that other room. Matteo Ricci is a Jesuit. So I could put him in the section of a room on the Protestant Reformation under a portrait of Ignatius of Loyola, because he's a disciple of Christ and a member of the Jesuit order, and therefore was under the orders of the people who followed Ignatius of Loyola. But actually, I am going to take Ricci's portrait bust and put it in the China section under new contacts. Here's why. Ricci is assigned in the late 1500s to go to the Chinese Empire, which is under the Ming dynasty at that time. Ricci is not the first Christian missionary to go to China. There have been Christian missionaries landing in China since the early 1500s. But many of them are Dominicans and Franciscans, and they assume that the analog to a Christian priest is a Buddhist monk, an orange-clad, shaven-head Buddhist monk. So, to the extent possible, these Dominicans and Franciscans sort of ape the mannerisms, they imitate Buddhist monks. Ricci says no. The common people respect Buddhist monks, but the leaders of China, the aristocrats, they look up to, they respect, and they leave the daily operation of China to Confucian scholars called Mandarins or Shih. These Confucian scholars are the bureaucracy that runs the day-to-day affairs of the Chinese Empire. They are trained in Confucian philosophy. And in understanding Confucian philosophy, they're trained in basically the philosophy of social harmony. They're basically trained on how to run a country, how to organize a society. So Ricci learns Chinese enough to start reading Confucius. And he, like anyone, can take the exams to become a Mandarin. And he succeeds. And so he's a low-grade government official, and he learns more, and he begins to make woodcut prints and a translation of the Bible into Chinese of certain Bible stories, like the story of the road to Emmaus, where the risen Christ appears to a bunch of dispirited apostles and walks towards the town of Emmaus, and it's only after a long walk together and after dinner that the stranger with the apostles looks up and says something exactly the way Jesus would say. And they're like, my God, it's him. And he's gone, just disappears. So that story is translated into Chinese, and there's a beautiful woodcut of them walking on the road to Emmaus. But he's not just satisfied to be a low-level official. Ricci's long-term goal is to become an assistant in the court of the Chinese emperor himself. And he spends the next decade or more with his brilliant mind that understands languages and culture and philosophy. He's a committed Jesuit, but he's also a Confucian philosopher. He rises up the chain of hierarchy, up the chain of command in the Chinese bureaucracy. Among the Mandarins, he becomes a chief Mandarin. And after being the chief Mandarin of a country, of a province in the countryside, he goes in the year 1600 to the court of the Ming emperor and becomes a personal advisor to the emperor, a European, an Italian, a Jesuit, who has taken the entire potential in his incredible mind and devoted it to rising up the chain of command so that the leadership of China, the emperor and his court, could learn that Christianity is not just a street phenomenon. It's not just for peasants. It's not like Buddhism. Christianity, as Ricci teaches it, has the subtle power that would appeal to men who hold the destiny of millions in their hands. And Ricci sets the stage for what will happen in China in the 1600s, which is under the new Qing dynasty or Manchu dynasty. The Chinese emperor, the Kangxi emperor, comes very close to becoming a Roman Catholic Christian. And that entire historical trend is because of what Matteo Ricci does. So today we have talked about the Counter-Reformation, which is boosted by the Jesuits. We have talked about the Protestant work ethic. We have talked about Calvinism. And we've talked about why all of this is important. So important for people in those days that they're willing to live for, die for, possibly even kill for their version of Christianity. I hope you have a good weekend. I hope you have a good weekend. I hope you have a good weekend. Enjoy yourself. Remember, write a comment below. It should be a paragraph thinking about, reacting, musing about something I've said in this lecture, bringing information to it, just a paragraph or so, and it has to be in by 5 o'clock p.m. Friday, October 6th. See you next week.